Hi, I'm AJ. This is Learning to Ride a Freewheel Unicycle Part 1 on mounting and pedaling. So I'm recording this after I've recorded all the other clips, and there's a lot of information, and that means that the video is really long, so I'm really sorry about that. With that being said, I need to add more still, and that's why you should ride a freewheel unicycle, because they're more difficult, and why you should ride a freewheel unicycle brakeless, because they're more difficult. And the main advantage of a general freewheel comes in Mountain Uni, where you can keep your pedals level, keep them horizontal, over drops, over rough terrain, which means that you eliminate all of those falls that would happen when your pedals end up vertical at 6 and 12. And that's, for me, that's the majority of my Mountain Uni falls, is when my pedals end up vertical. And then there's speed. If you're doing it right, it's much faster than a fixed wheel uni, but that requires you to ride brakeless, which brings me into why you should ride brakeless, and that's really where a freewheel unicycle can begin to shine. So, for one, there's the whole considering that you learned it part. If you're riding a freewheel unicycle, but you have a brake on it, you probably couldn't ride that freewheel unicycle if your brake came off. Whereas if you learn to ride a freewheel unicycle without a brake, and then you put a brake on, what's going to happen is you're going to be a much better freewheel unicyclist than you would be otherwise. So there's the whole learning aspect, and then there's what you can learn about a fixed wheel uni. And that's the biggest advantage that I've noticed, really, for me, is I'm a much better fixed wheel rider than I would have been had I not been riding freewheel brakeless. Because you really learn how your body works on a fixed wheel uni, and you learn how your body works on a freewheel uni, and you're able to juxtapose those and really derive a lot about how it works. You become really efficient at pedaling because you learn to pedal in perfect circles on the freewheel uni, and I'll get more into that later. But yeah, that's why you should freewheel. For safety gear, I don't care what you do. For other disciplines, you need a helmet for a freewheel. Wear anything else that you would normally wear when you're practicing a new skill or are worried about falling, but you need a helmet for a freewheel unicycle. Falls happen backwards and they happen quickly, so you need a helmet to protect the back of your head in the event of a crash backwards. For a unicycle setup, you need a freewheel unicycle, which can be pretty difficult to find. So either get a complete used one from someone else, or you can get the specific hubs. So they're just freewheeling, collarless hubs. JR Drift Trikes makes a really popular one, the JR Drift Trike 1-to-1 P-Hub. Those, as far as I know, no one's broken one, which is fantastic. And then the one I'm using is the Nimbus Drift Trikes collarless disc hub. They don't make it anymore. If you can find one, it's still pretty good. I've used it for 3 years. I can see wear on it, but it's working, and it's working well. So, yeah, that's the hubs. For cranks, you want it to be short enough that you can pedal smoothly, but long enough that you have the torque you need. I know that's really broad. These are 125 millimeter on a 26-inch wheel. You could ride whatever length you want, but somewhere between 114 and 150 is probably going to be the most comfortable. Elephant in the room. I do not have a brake on, and I recommend that you don't either. I've ridden on and off with the brake, and I've found that I've had worse falls while I have a brake on the unicycle, and that's on like a given terrain. On flat ground, worse falls with the brake on, because I get complacent. So on a unicycle with the brake, you're like, oh, well, I can be leaning so far backwards, and I can just grab the brake and recover, and that's fine. But if you're trying to ride without a brake, and you're just doing that by not touching it, then you have a pretty high chance of missing the lever, or not getting enough power, or just grabbing too late. And that time is better spent getting your feet off the unicycle. Especially when you're just sessioning to get comfortable on it. Because the brake can really be a crutch. It will help you. Say I can ride a Freewheel Unicycle much quicker, because you'll be able to get on. Mounting is easier with a brake, and you'll be able to feather the brake and pedal, because pedaling is easier with the brake, and get from, point A to point B easily. But then when you take the brake off, you can't ride the resulting unicycle. Whereas if you learn to ride a freewheel with the brake off, then you can put it on later, and there's no real problems that'll arise from that, except for maybe you'll fall off in front if you're not used to how hard to pull the brake, if you haven't used a brake on other unicycles before. So all the videos in this series are not going to have skills that require you to use a brake. So I recommend you don't even have one on the uni, so that your brain switches into the mode of, oh, I'm falling, I should get off, instead of, oh, I'm falling, I'm going to grab the brake and hope I pull it hard enough. Before you start to ride a Freewheel Unicycle, you need to first have some skills on your general fixed wheel unicycle. Doesn't really matter which one, but you're going to do some practicing on this first before you can get yourself into trouble on a freewheel. If you're already a confident fixed wheel rider, you can probably start to learn the freewheel, but what I do recommend people learn first, or know how to do first, is ride one foot, because when you're riding one foot, you have to be sure that you're not adding any reverse force down on your pedals, because you have to get the pedals over the top. So yeah, make sure you can do that first. Just a short distance, nothing complicated. Then you're almost ready. I'm just going to have you practice one more thing on the fixed wheel uni, and that's riding in a straight line. We'll be extra special careful safe not to push backwards on the pedals at all. Because when you do that on a freewheel uni, it doesn't react the way that you're used to, and it ends up with you leaning further backwards and falling harder. So it's going to look pretty straightforward, but you're going to feel unstable if you're doing it right, because you're not allowing yourself to correct forward. Okay, I'm realizing that there's a lot of information in this video. It's definitely going to be overwhelming. I'm aware of that, so just watch it a couple times, make sure you understand everything. I'm teaching mounting and riding in the same tutorial, because if you don't know how to control the unicycle once both your feet are on the pedals, you're not going to know how to get off the unicycle with both your feet on the pedals, which is terrifying. So yeah, there's that. And then also, an important thing to know is, just like in fixed wheel unicycling, where pedals vertical means you have no control, on a freewheel unicycle that's also true. It's even more true, because on a fixed wheel, when your pedals are vertical, you have some momentum of the wheel to push them back to horizontal. On a freewheel unicycle, they stay that way. So you need to make sure that you're pedaling really smooth. You have control through the whole 360 degrees. Also, pedals vertical is more dangerous because you can't get your feet off. It's hard to explain. But yeah, pedals vertical is bad as always, but it's worse. And pedals horizontal, it actually makes bailing really much easier. Not easy, but much easier. Okay, let's go into mounting, but what I don't want you to do is watch this mounting part, stop here, try to mount, because you're not going to really know where to go from there. And if you try to ride a freewheel uni like a normal uni, again, you're going to get hurt. These are fun, they're not necessarily safe. So please watch the whole thing, make sure you know how to pedal before you try to mount, or you're just going to get yourself into trouble. So, first off, the first mount I'm going to try to teach is it's a standard mount variation, except that you can't push down with your foot, because this happens, and then you have no control, because, again, pedals vertical is bad, and on a freewheel, pedals vertical is worse. So, instead you're going to point your toe down, and you're going to pull back with your hamstring and with your calf, and then you should have, if you're pulling back hard enough, you should have enough control to just step up slowly. If the standard mount just isn't working for you, and you keep trying and you either keep ending up in pedals vertical or you just aren't comfortable muscling the unicycle around, kind of like you have to, then you can try this variation. It's more complicated, but what you're going to do is, instead of setting your pedals up like how you normally would, so I normally set it up with my right foot back, you're going to set the seat out in front of you. You're going to turn the cranks 180 degrees, so now my right foot is forwards, and you're going to stand on the crank. So you set up on the crank, I'm going to swing my ground foot, my left foot, around the frame, reposition my feet, and ride off. It's definitely more complicated, that's why I don't recommend it first, but it also helps the unicycle feel a little more normal. If you have a background in freestyle, you might be familiar with the reverse mount. I really don't recommend doing this on a Freewheel Uni, but again, if nothing else is working, neither of the first two work, then you can try this one. Yeah, it works. The unicycle behaves exactly like normal, but the issue is that the wheel wants to continue forwards and shoot out in front of you. Finally, let's say nothing else worked, you just can't seem to get on this thing. The last mount I'd recommend, and it is the hop-on mount, and it's the last one I'd recommend because it's really easy for the mount to take up all your concentration, for you to forget you're on a Freewheel Uni, for you to try to adjust your position as soon as you get back on, and then the unicycle lays you out flat on your back. I really don't recommend this one unless you already know what you're doing, you're comfortable on the Freewheel Uni, to the point where you're not going to let that happen. But again, it'll definitely get your feet on the pedals. The issue is, will the unicycle stay upright? Will you stay upright? Will you be able to get your feet off the pedals when you need to? With that being said, it's exactly like normal. Okay, so hopefully one of those mounts looked good to you. Hopefully you haven't tried it yet, because, like I said earlier, you should probably watch the whole video, make sure you know what your plan's going to be before you get on the unicycle and realize you don't have a plan. But before we can start pedaling, first we need to talk about how you balance and the physics of how you balance forwards, backwards on a fixed wheel unicycle, and how that doesn't necessarily translate to a freewheel unicycle. So, on a fixed wheel uni, you're able to adjust your balance by speeding up and slowing down the wheel, depending on whether you're leaning too far forwards or backwards. So your body wants to keep going at a constant speed, and you're capable of adjusting the speed of the wheel based on that. So a fixed wheel uni, you can pedal forwards and backwards. You probably take that for granted if all you've ridden is a fixed wheel uni. If you hadn't ridden a fixed wheel uni, learn to do that before learning to ride a freewheel. Hopefully you didn't get this far in and realize that a freewheel is harder. But if you did, please learn to ride a fixed wheel first. Otherwise, your body wants to keep going at a constant speed, and if you start to fall forwards, you can speed up, and if you start to fall backwards, you can slow down. So, I start to lean forwards, I accelerate the wheel, and that, of course, accelerates my body a little bit, but more importantly, it brings the wheel back underneath me. And if I start to fall backwards, then I can just slow down, or speed up backwards, in that case. So that contributes to what I like to call, and I've heard called, a balance pocket, which is basically how far backwards and how far forwards of a fall you can save. So on a fixed wheel uni, you know, it might be from like here to here. And on a freewheel uni, when you're pedaling, you can definitely accelerate the same amount going forwards, so it's still going to be about here. But for falling backwards, well, when you try to slow down or pedal backwards, nothing happens to the wheel, which means that if you start to fall backwards and you try to slow down, nothing happens and you fall backwards more and you try to slow down more, and it's this vicious cycle that ends up with you on your butt on the ground and your unicycle is shooting out that direction. So, the way you avoid that, for now, when all you know how to do is pedal, and I'm not letting you use a brake, for one, you can do what a lot of people do and say, yeah, no, I'm going to use the brake so I can slow down. That'll definitely get you from point A to point B faster. But it's also kind of, you become dependent on it. You don't learn to balance without the brake. So when you take it off, all of a sudden you can't ride this entire unicycle because one part's missing. Whereas, if you learn to ride brakeless first, then you can put a brake on and all of a sudden you can ride over rougher stuff. You widen your balance pocket, essentially. But it is possible to ride long distances without a brake. And that's where we're going to go. And part 2 is going to be about coasting. But for now, when all you're doing is mounting and pedaling, you have the same forward tolerance. Your balance pocket is the same going forwards. But going backwards, you can't go past here. And that's the answer. You just can't go past here. Well, that means that you either have to pedal perfectly smoothly so that you never go outside that balance pocket at all. You never have to speed up, you never have to slow down. Or you just go for a shorter distance and you accelerate constantly. And the more you're accelerating, the further backwards than you would like you would be able to lean. Because if you're accelerating really, really lightly, then you only have that little bit to go before all of a sudden you're slowing down. And slowing down, of course, for these purposes of pedaling, you can't do that. But if you're accelerating harder, then all of a sudden you have all this to work with. So a fixed wheel is accelerating and decelerating, and a freewheel is accelerating and accelerating less. So what that's going to look like is your mount of choice. For me, it's standard mount. And pedal forward, then run out of space. Okay, the last thing you need to know how to do to ride a freewheel unicycle safely is get off, which is really, it's an important skill and it's its own skill. It's weird. So on a fixed wheel uni, you have, again, I'm going to the fixed wheel uni because there are some important differences that come from one little part being changed, which is the hub. When you need to get off a fixed wheel uni, assuming you're moving forwards, your pedals are moving, but they're moving with the wheel. So when you need to take your foot off and it's going in front, it'll continue moving away from you in a predictable way, because that wheel's carrying momentum. On a freewheel uni, when you're going fast enough, so riding speed, and you need to get off, you're going to stop pedaling. Just by instinct, you're going to stop pedaling. It's something you're used to doing. On a fixed wheel, except it normally stops the unicycle too. So you're going to stop pedaling, but you're going to keep moving. And that means that your cranks will be able to rotate forwards and backwards freely, because they won't have caught up to the wheel, right? So you're going like this, you stop pedaling, and well, this can go like that, and like that. Equally easily, both directions. And might not seem significant, but what it means is if you don't take both your feet off at exactly the same time, the pedals are going to move in a way that causes them to stick to your feet. And that's how you end up with those falls where the pedals stick to your feet and the unicycle goes forwards and your feet are still on it, and you end up on your back with nothing you can do about it, and you go straight down. You don't arc down in the same way you do on a fixed wheel uni. So, moral of the story, take your feet off at the exact same time. And that's easiest to do from pedals horizontally. So, I personally jump up to get myself clear of it. You can also slide your feet sideways and around. That's another way. Just like that. thanks for watching. I hope this made sense. If it didn't, feel free to leave comments below or DM me on Instagram. I'm at AJKJ or join Freewheel Unicycle chat on Facebook. I'll accept you into the group as long as you tell me that you know the difference between a fixed wheel and a freewheel unicycle. I don't care if you can ride either one. Next video is going to be on coasting, so before then, that kind of prerequisite is just going to be pedaling in a straight line, coasting a couple clicks, and then continuing pedaling. That'll look something like this.